Lion in the Wind, Chapter 19. A Yigs and Marshal general stood in his command tent and studied a map of the front lines that lay on a table before him. It appears that our lines have held surprisingly well so far, and have completely stalled out the Gorb assault, he said. Yes, but for how long? Asked the colonel. The longer we can hold them here, the better. If it hadn't been for all the hard work our Air Force has done in wreaking havoc on the Gorg supply lines and rear echelon, we likely would have already been pushed back much further than this. Hopefully we can finally stop them here once and for all and get them to agree to a ceasefire. Wouldn't we want all-out surrender, sir? Asked the colonel. Right now I'll settle for a ceasefire. At least then they won't be slaughtering our boys as they have been. Just then a courier rushed into the tent and handed the general a message. The two officers looked it over and then groaned. It looks like we haven't softened them up enough, muttered the colonel. Apparently not, as our present defensive line is too exposed to repel an attack of this magnitude. Colonel, order all troops to fall back to our next defensive line and dig in. Hopefully we'll be in better shape to stave off this attack from there. Yes, sir, replied the colonel. Then he and the courier slipped out of the tent and were gone. But as the colonel hurried away to carry out the general's orders, he noticed that the courier wasn't following him. He stopped and looked all around for him, but saw no sign of the man. He shrugged briefly, and then continued on his way. Far off in the distance the courier appeared in a puff of smoke next to Nagago and grinned devilishly. They have fallen for your ruse, my lord, said the man. Nagago laughed wickedly. Excellent. The further they fall back, the weaker they become. He again laughed wickedly. You lose again, Mashwa. In time this world, and your throne, will be mine. Bergen sat quietly in his laboratory and tinkered with the inner workings of a small robot that lay on his workbench. He soon finished his work and immediately set about uploading a simple operating system into it. After the upload completed, Bergen powered up the unit and waited patiently until it perked up and then stared at him. Greetings, little one, what's your name? Asked Bergen playfully. I am Unit CS-25189, a Type 2 Yigs and Interactive Assistance droid. How may I be of service to you? Barked the little droid. Wait right there and I'll be right back, replied Bergen. He then hurried across the room and picked up Persia in his arms. By the gates of Tursar, young lady, you need to lose some weight, he chided. Dad, I'm not overweight, I'm just extra huggable, quipped Persia. Bergen laughed. Close your eyes, I have a surprise for you, he said. Persia smiled widely and covered her eyes as Bergen set her down in front of the little droid. You can open them now, he said. Persia uncovered her eyes and looked at the little droid in wonder. What is it? She asked curiously. It's an assistance droid I built for you. Persia furrowed her brow in curiosity. What's it for? She asked. To be your companion and help you whenever you need it. I'm going to be very busy over the next several weeks, possibly months, trying to bring the new lions online. Hence why I built this little droid for you to be a companion whenever I'm busy. Persia looked curiously at the little droid. So what does he do? She asked. Anything you want him to. He's yours to keep. Persia looked at Bergen in surprise. Really? She said excitedly. Bergen nodded. You should name him as well, he said. Persia thought about this for a few moments, and then with a sly, silly grin said, I'm going to call him Breakman. Bergen gave Persia a puzzled look. Breakman? Why that name? It's an abbreviation of the phrase breakable little man. He's so small and flimsy looking, I'll have to be careful not to break him, she said as she playfully poked at the little droid's chest. Bergen chuckled. He's a lot more durable than you think. He's made out of the same alloys as Tegani and the other lions, which means he can take quite a bit of abuse. Not that you should abuse him, of course. But you certainly won't break him easily. At least I hope not. Persia sighed as she thought about Tegani. Bergen noticed Persia's sudden change of humor, and asked curiously, Is everything all right? I really miss him, Dad. Tegani, I mean. I really hope he comes back soon, she said. Bergen nodded. I do too, sweetie. But he'll return eventually. And, with these new lions, he'll be back sooner than you think. How many will there be? She asked. 650. Why? Asked Bergen curiously. Oh, just trying to imagine how big our family is becoming. Bergen laughed. Well, at least you don't have to worry about feeding them all. Persia snorted. Yeah, tell me about it. Can you imagine that grocery bill? She quipped. Pentel peeked over the side of his trench as the gourd quickly retreated out of range. Wow, what was that all about? He asked. Beats me, sir. I've seen the gourd do some weird things, but that takes the cake, said Welk. It is possible that they were testing our defenses, said Tegani. Pentel snorted. I doubt they were testing them. It looked more like they tripped over them. The three looked up just as a group of Yigsin fighters raced by overhead. It could also have something to do with them, said Welk. Just then Tegani perked up slightly. Both men noticed this immediately. Do you see something? Asked Pentel. No, there is a message coming over the radio. All units are ordered to pull back. Apparently something big is coming and we don't have the ability to defend against it in our current position. Welk grunted. Either that or command is chickening out again. I doubt they are, but orders are orders, so we need to pull back as requested, said Pentel. Welk swore. I was hoping we could hold this line until they sent more lions to help us out. Tegani shook his head. I'm sorry to ruin your hopes of an early rescue, but I have no information indicating that there will be more of my kind coming to the battlefield anytime soon. Well, whenever they do, I hope it's soon. I'm getting tired of falling back. As am I, said Tegani. Breakman stood quietly in the corner of Bergen's laboratory and mindlessly studied the room without a care in the world, or any concern for time. His simple programming didn't leave him room for anything other than blindly obeying Persia's every wish and whim. So, whenever she didn't have anything for him, he merely stood around and waited on her next command. As he stood there in the corner waiting for further orders, a brilliant flood of dazzlingly white light filled the room and then faded away to reveal Meshwa, who then knelt down in front of Breakman. He smiled at the little droid and gently placed a hand on his head. Wake up, Breakman, he said kindly. The little robot flinched slightly and then looked up at Meshwa. What is my task? He asked. You are to be a guardian and companion to Persia and Bergen, and protect them from all harm and danger until the appointed time. So long as power flows through my circuits, I will do all within my abilities to do as you have asked of me, he said. Meshwa smiled and then vanished. Breakman suddenly found himself surrounded by darkness and utter silence again, save for the gentle sounds of sleep coming from the office. He soon slipped across the laboratory and stopped in front of the office door, where he peered through the darkness at Persia and Bergen, who were within. He then pondered what he'd do about both of them. I've got a geeky old man and a sharp-witted tigress to protect. Oh boy, this is going to be fun. You really gave me a zinger, huh, Meshwa, he thought. He then turned and looked at the large room full of robotic equipment, parts and supplies, and thought about this. I may be small, but I can use that to my advantage. However, I need to find a way to protect them without giving away my new sentience, he thought to himself. Just then he spied a collection of numerous small service robots and recon spiders scattered all around the room. Like a flash of inspiration, an idea came to him. He grinned slyly. Yeah, that'll do. A long column of military vehicles rumbled slowly down a rugged, winding, rutted country road as the Yigsin army slowly retreated across the prairie. In front of them was a line of short, rocky hills that rose up from the prairie floor like the teeth of a dragon and stretched away as far as the eye could see. Sims peeked out from the side of the truck and studied them. So where are we headed? He asked. The Ignani Karapara, replied Tegani. The what? Asked one of the soldiers. The Ignani Karapara. It's the ancient Yigsin name for the geological formation we know of as the Central Continental Ridge Line. The soldier screwed up his face in an expression of confusion. What's that? He asked. Didn't you take geography? Asked another soldier. Obviously not, chided a third. The first soldier glared at him, but said nothing. The Central Continental Ridgeline is a series of rocky hills stretching from the mountains in the north to the ocean in the south. It's the boundary marker that divides the Yigsen Nation into two halves, one east and one west, said Sims. Do you think it's where we're going? Asked the soldier. It most likely is, given its incredible potential as a natural defensive barrier. Oh, that should be fun, muttered a soldier. How will it be fun? Asked Tegani. I meant it facetiously, tin head. Tegani cocked an eyebrow. Ah, understood. The caravan of vehicles soon passed through a tunnel that had been carved through the ridgeline and came out the other side into a large staging area spread out behind it. The trucks then turned and rumbled north for a while before stopping near another staging area. Pentel got out of the cab and motioned to the other trucks. All right, everybody out. This is our stop, he shouted. The men climbed down from the trucks and followed Pentel up the hillside to a small door carved in the rock face. Sims ran his hand along the door and marveled at the craftsmanship. Who did this? He asked. According to what I heard, they were working on this some 2 years before the war started. Apparently, someone had the foresight to realize how valuable this ridgeline would be as a defensive point and had it prepared for us, said Pentel. Likely it was Major Delgra, said Tegani. Welk nodded. Given what I know about him, that wouldn't surprise me at all. So who actually did the digging? Asked Sims. Tegani, Welk and Pentel all looked at him incredulously. He shrugged apologetically. What? Asked Sims. Who else would be capable of digging out an entire ridgeline like this in just a few years and do it with this level of quality? Said Welk. Robots, said Sims. Yay! Give the man a hand, said one of the soldiers. Shut up, Private, said Pentel in jest. Yes, sir, replied the soldier with a smile. All right, let's go in and check out our new home, said Welk. The men soon stepped through the door and found a single room that, while cramped, provided just enough living space for one squad. Wow, it's gonna be cozy in here, said a soldier. Well, we have more than just one of these assigned to us. Sergeant Sims, your squad will get this bunker. Sergeant Welk, see that the other squads find theirs, said Pentel. Yes, sir, replied Welk. He then pointed at several other men, and said, Corporals, get your men together and follow me. Yes, Sergeant, replied several of them and then followed him out of the cave. Persia sat and stared in amazement at the room before her. It was filled wall to wall with hundreds of robotic lions that stood motionless before her like great furry statues. She walked slowly past several lions in the first row and studied them curiously. Is this all of them? She asked. Bergen nodded. Yes, it is. The last of them passed the software and hardware qualification testing last night and are ready to be programmed. If all goes well, and I don't hit any unforeseen problems, I should have at least 100 of them active by the end of the week. When can they go out to help Tegani? Bergen shrugged. I really don't know. A few days. Maybe even a few weeks. It'll all depend on how fast they grow and mature after they become active. Persia sat down in front of one of the lions and studied its face. I hope it's soon, she said with a sigh. Bergen nodded. Just then his phone rang. This is Bergen. Yes? Sure, I can do that. When do you need me? When? Well, all right, but okay. Sure. I'll be right there. He then closed his phone and said, Persia, I have to go see Dr. Visnell. Just stay put and I'll be right back. Persia didn't move, but instead continued to stare at the lion in front of her. Seeing tears forming in Persia's eyes, Bergen hesitated. He wanted to sit down and have a long, heart-to-heart chat with her. But his duties were calling him elsewhere. He also knew that Dr. Visnell wouldn't wait for him forever. He soon let out a frustrated sigh. He'd have to deal with this later. As he hurried out of the room, Breakman stood in a corner and watched this curiously. A frustrated grunt soon escaped his lips as well. I can deal with bad guys and I can deal with disasters. But what do you want me to do with this? You put me here to protect her, not be her personal shrink, he muttered. Her heart is broken because the one she loves is far away and surrounded by a danger that she cannot protect him from, came Meshwa's soft, loving voice in his mind. So is this what a mother's heart is like? Fragile and scared? Sounds like the proverbial herd beast in a pottery shop if you ask me, said Breakman. Meshwa chuckled, the sound echoing gently in Breakman's mind. A mother's heart is a complex thing. Fear and fragility are just two parts of that. But so is love, kindness and the desire to protect the ones she loves. Humph, that doesn't really help me any. What am I supposed to do now? I'm open to suggestions, oh great one, he replied with a hint of sarcasm. Go to her, tell her I love her, and that I can help her if she will let me, said Meshwa. Breakman cocked an eyebrow in bemused surprise. Seriously? Can't you do that yourself? Silence. Breakman sighed in frustration. All right, fine. I'll do it. But if she eats me, it's your fault, said Breakman. Meshwa chuckled. Breakman strode across the room as requested and stopped next to Persia. Ma'am, I don't want to seem like I'm intruding on you or anything, but I need to talk to you about something. It involves the lions. Persia continued to stare at the lion in front of her as though she hadn't heard him. I know you're worried about Mr. Tegani. But you needn't fear. He'll be all right. It's not his time to die yet, said Breakman. Persia glared at him out of the corner of one eye. Breakman frowned slightly. Hey, don't look at me like that. I'm just the messenger, he said. Persia looked back at the lions. For who? She asked indignantly. Breakman could tell that she really didn't want to hear the answer, but he decided that she needed to hear it anyways. His name is Meshwa. He says that he cares deeply for you. She looked at him curiously. What are you talking about? Meshwa doesn't exist. He's just some mythical being that my dad and Tegani believe in for reasons I still don't understand. Actually, I can't even really say Dad believes in him. It's more of a passing fancy. Breakman crossed his arms and grunted. Oh, trust me, he's real. If he wasn't, I wouldn't be here, he said in frustration. Persia snorted in disbelief. You were made by my dad, just like Tegani. You can't tell me this Meshwa character actually created you. That'd be absurd. All right, Meshwa, I'm out of ideas. What now? Thought Breakman. Touch the lions that stand before her, and say, awaken. This will be a demonstration of my love to her and the truth of my existence. Breakman furrowed his brow. You're not serious, are you? He thought. Silence. All right, fine, whatever you say, he muttered. He soon walked over to the two lions closest to Persia and then turned to her. Okay, Miss Prissy Pants, you want proof? Here's your proof, he said snarkily. He then turned to the lions, and said, in the name of Meshwa, I command you to awaken. To the utter and complete surprise of both Breakman and Persia, all of the lions flinched simultaneously, and then began to move. They then glanced around the room briefly before turning their attention on Persia, and studying her with great interest. At first she thought she was seeing things. But it wasn't long before she realized that the lions in front of her were indeed alive. She backed up several paces and studied them anxiously. Breakman, what did you just do? She asked curiously. I did what Meshwa told me to, said Breakman. You what? She said in reply. The two lions closest to her soon smiled at her. Greetings, Mother. My name is Pen, said the first lion. And I am Teal, said the second. Pen? Teal? But, how? My dad hasn't programmed you yet, said Persia in surprise. As she shifted anxiously back and forth, Breakman stood nearby and smirked happily at this. Huh. That was fun. Can we do that again? He thought. In time, laughed Meshwa. Cool, replied Breakman. Bergen strode into his laboratory and found Visnal sitting behind several laptops that were spread out on a nearby workbench. I'm here. What was so important that it had you in a dither when you called? Asked Bergen. Visnal motioned for Bergen to come closer. Idias, I've been doing some research into Tegani's sentience and have come to a rather interesting conclusion, he said. Bergen perked up in interest. Oh? What kind? Well, from the very beginning I've been extremely curious about Tegani's sentience, what made it work, and why you succeeded where so many others, including myself, have failed. I think I've finally found the answer. Do you remember the paper I wrote a few years back about robotic sentience? Bergen nodded. Sentience in a digital world. Yes, I remember it fondly. Your theories were quite interesting. Do you remember the primary premise of the paper? Asked Visnal. Bergen thought for a moment. Not offhand. I remember reading it, but not the specific details. Well, in short, the paper talked about how robotic sentience would be difficult to achieve unless a cybernetic mind could somehow mimic many of the same elements that are found in a biological mind. Bergen shrugged. Ah, yes, now I remember. But what does that have to do with why you called me here? Visnal pointed to the first laptop and said, let me demonstrate to you what I mean by using my analysis program. Seeing is typically the easiest way to understand a complex subject. Take a look at the graph on this first laptop here. This is the activity patterns of a normal Yigsen brain. He pointed to a second laptop. And this is the activity patterns of a robotic AI. Bergen nodded in approval. The differences are quite noticeable, he said. Yes. Very noticeable. In fact, you shouldn't be able to confuse the two. Now, let me show you the output from Tegani's mind. He then took a third laptop and turned it so Bergen could see it. Bergen's eyes went wide in surprised confusion. That looks almost exactly like what we saw on the first laptop. You sure that's Tegani's? Visnal nodded. Dead certain. I did the test myself and can verify its accuracy. But here's where things get even more interesting. Thinking this was just something unique to Tegani, I took the base copy of his iOS and booted it in a test shell. Needless to say, it didn't function as desired. Yeah, I had the same problem when I loaded it into the first set of new lines. Well, thinking that the differences I was seeing were simply the result of the AI operating in an idle state, I put it into a dynamic test loop, knowing that it would generate the same patterns you would typically see in a fully functional AI. Or, at least a pattern that we could record. He then pointed to the fourth laptop and said, unfortunately, this is what I got. Bergen shook his head. That's impossible. How can that output look just like the other AI output, and yet Tegani's looks like the Yigsen output? Visnal inhaled deeply, and said, I've been wondering that myself. It really makes no sense to me. Theoretically, as you've said, it's impossible. The laws of coding state that a program will generate the same output every time if the input remains the same. But here's an example where that's not true. I realize that one of these snapshots is of his base AI in a diagnostic test loop and the other is of Tegani's active mind, so there will be some differences. However, there shouldn't be this much of a difference. Certainly we'd see a small change between the two, but nothing to this level. So what does it mean? Asked Bergen. Visnal crossed his arms, and said, Doctor, do you believe in souls? Bergen blinked in surprise at this. That seems like an odd question to be asking at a time like this. Well? Do you? Bergen thought about this for a bit. I guess I do. While they haven't been scientifically proven to exist, there's enough data to suggest that they might. Just then Bergen's eyes went wide with surprise. You're not actually suggesting that Tegani has a soul, are you? Visnal shrugged. What other explanation is there? When all the facts have been checked, and the impossible excluded, whatever is left, however illogical or improbable, must be the truth. But a soul? Visnal shrugged. You said it yourself that you have no idea how any of the lions became sentient. You even admitted that you could never get his iOS to work much above a basic logic pattern. Given that fact, the only reasonable conclusion is that Tegani has somehow gained a soul. But that's impossible, exclaimed Bergen. Idiots, it's the only possible answer. Nothing else fits, retorted Visnal. But how would he have gotten one? Asked Bergen. Visnell shrugged. Honestly, I have no idea. Bergen thought deeply about this for several moments, and then said, Can you email me this information? I want to go over this myself. Visnell nodded. Gladly.